18 already of Masechet Zevachim. That's Kuf Yud. We're about to come inside the Grand Siyum at the moment. Nothing like having a coffee here in Eretz Yisrael, actually in the famous Cafe Rimon complex over here in the city of Bet Shemesh, and nothing like sharing over some words. Now, friends, in a couple of days' time, we are going to be in the Grand Siyum, which is a phenomenal achievement. So, kol hakavod to everyone. We've done it as a community over here, and I think I'll definitely drink a coffee to that, friends. I said a blessing already, so I won't need to say a blessing again. Now, friends, we're on page 118. Losing another phenomenal insight from Rabbi Mendel Weinbach, the longest period of the sanctuary location before the construction of the Bet HaMikdash temple in Jerusalem was the 369-year period of the Mishkan in Shiloh, something we've very much learned about and very much spoken about over the last nearly 4 months since we started this. Now, a great Rabbi Yochanan, he called attention to the apparent, conflict in various descriptions found in various different sources, Talmudic sources, and so on and so forth, regarding this specific sanctuary. When Hannah, we know, brought her son Shmuel to Shiloh in fulfillment of her vow to dedicate her long-awaited child to the service of God in the sanctuary, we are actually told over in Shmuel Aleph, in chapter 1, in verse number 24, she brought him to the house of God. But now when David HaMelech, King David, he speaks of, let's say, the Churban, the destruction of the Mishkan in Shiloh, he describes it in 2 passages as a tent over here. Very much, we can actually see this illustrated from the book of Tehillim, I think quoting over a verse he does, from chapter 78, verse 60. Or possibly, maybe a connotation to this is in verse 67 over here, friends. So much can be discussed within regards to this. I recommend everyone to do a seder on the Tanakh every single day. There's fantastic classes on the internet that are available within regards to this topic. Okay, now, friends, we know that the resolution for this is provided by this sage, is that Shiloh Sanctuary had both the feature of a house and that of a tent, of a bayit and an ohel, respectively. In contrast to the gold-covered boards that formed the walls of the Mishkan in the Midbar and the first 14 years in the land of Israel, the walls in Shiloh were made of stone then. Its ceiling, we could say, remained the same as its predecessor, with its tapestries and skins. The stone walls thus gave it the nature of a house, while its covering still endowed with a resemblance to a tent. Now, the great Maharsha is going to point out over here that the first passage which deals with Shiloh, let's say in its beauty, it's in its splendor, describes it as a house, which symbolizes stability. Now, the passage that describes its destruction, on the other hand, describe it as a tent, which symbolizes a temporary dwelling. So we can see, we just came out of Sukkot about 3 months, just over 3 months ago, 4 months ago nearly, and about more, three-ish months ago. So that is like a tent, also temporary dwelling, whereas a house we very much speak about the whole time. It's somewhere permanent and somewhere we will be the whole year, respectively. And that's something that we very much have to point out over here, friends. So that's very interesting. Yeah. So just to add on further, okay, so we I've seen the feature difference over here between the tent and house, as you're saying itself. Now, the great Maharshan, a great commentator, he points out that the first passage, which deals with Shiloh in its glory, describes it as a house, as we said before, which symbolizes stability, and the passage that describes the destruction, on the other hand, is obviously as a tent, as you mentioned. Now, let's say this blend, we've got a blend over here of, let's say, permanence and transience, may also explain why the Torah describes Shiloh as the resting place, and the Bet HaMikdash in Yerushalayim as the inheritance, as Yerusha. There's very much we see in the book of Devarim, chapter 12, verse 9. Shiloh was constructed when Jews finally rested from their conquest of the land and its division. This sanctuary enjoyed a degree of house permanence for 369 years. Remember, that's a lot of generations, relatively about 13, 14, 15 Dorot generations. But that was only a tent. In preparation for the permanent of the Bet HaMikdash. So we know that obviously the Mishkan, it's something temporary, albeit it was 369 years. But the Bet HaMikdash, which actually it was only about 420 years, respectively each time, that was, let's say, the permanent abode, what we obviously pray that we're going to see the rebuilding of the Bet HaMikdash ASAP now, friends. Very interesting. So, a brilliant insights. Let's go, and because we're about to culminate here on the page in of itself, respectively. There's another very interesting insight that's given over by Rob Mendel Weinbach, also from the Osmech website. He titles it as "When East Meets West." What's going on here? And we know that the site upon which Bet HaMikdash, which we're speaking about at the moment, stood, Rabbi Chama Bar Chanina, he actually says it was divided between the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. Very much would know that when it was divided. The eastern part, which contained the entrance, let's say from the Temple Mount and the courtyards leading up to the altar, belonged to Yehuda, and the western part, which contained the sanctuary itself, belonged to Benjamin. Now, in regards to the altar itself, it stood on Benjamin's territory, but a narrow corridor extended from Yehuda's territory to encompass the eastern wall of the altar. So you can see, it was like some form of overlapping between the two places in itself, respectively. What's interesting, friends, is, be that as it may, let's say the saintly Benjamin saw in a divine revelation that he would not have the entire altar in his share, and he felt, obviously, unfortunately, deep remorse, anguish that he could not absorb that specific corridor, so that he should have the privilege of the entire sacrificial service being performed in his dwelling, his territory over there. And as a reward for having such great longing, let's just say, for this, he was given the honor of hosting the Shekhinah, the divine presence, which would rest in the western part of the Bet HaMikdash, which was indeed in his area. So he would have that spot at the end. Now, this teaches us, Rav Weinbach actually says over, and it points out that Rabbi Yaakov Bar Shlomo Ibn Chovab was the author of the famous book, the En Yaakov, that when someone has an ambition to personally complete a mitzvah with his own efforts and resources, his ambition is not to be condemned as an expression, let's say, of self-centered craving for his honor, but is rather a demonstration of a will to serve Hashem, which is deserving of praise and reward. And we very much see that, I believe, in Amud Bet over here, as there's a culmination of the Gemara that's coming out in the next couple of days, friends, over here. I want to share over one more insight from 2 days ago. We didn't speak about it when we did the Daf. On page 116, once again, another insight from Rav Mendel Weinbach from the ohr.edu website over here, where he talks about korbanot over here. The offer of sacrifices was not just a monopoly it was not just a Jewish monopoly. It was also for non-Jews, so it was for everyone. B'nai Noach offered sacrifices as well. That very much we know and learned about it, and we spoke about this, I think, in a video we did during Sukkot. What sort of sacrifices did the B'nai Noach bring? That's a question that's brought over here. Now, this point was disputed between two great rabbis, Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. One view was that they were also able to offer shlamim sacrifices, peace sacrifices, in which only some fatty parts of the animal were burned on the altar, while the flesh was consumed by the owner of the sacrificial animal. Now, there was another view that contended that the non-Jews was limited to the olah sacrifice, which is burned in its entirety. So they were entitled to sacrifice it. Now, the latter view, it's based, I think, or basis its position in a passage actually in the book of Shir Hashirim in chapter 4, verse number 16. Let the north be aroused and the south enter, which he interprets it in a specific fashion over here, friends. He says, let those whose service is in the north, the non-Jews, who can offer only an olah, whose slaughter took place only in the north part of the sanctuary, be removed from their prominence in favor of those whose service is in the south, the Jewish nation, who may also offer shlamim, which may be slaughtered even in the southern part of the altar. Now, this transfer, let's just say, of essentialness or importance from the nations of the world to the Jewish nation, Rashi points out, refers to the welcoming of Moshiach as the Redeemer, when Moshiach is going to come to Hashem now. What is the significance, let's say, of this distinction between and Olah and the Shlamim sacrifice? Now, the Olah over here, friends, represents a total offering of an earthly possession to heaven, a universal concept which even those without Torah are capable of appreciating. A shlamim, however, comes from the word shalom, which means peace, because its offering affects peace between the altar, the Kohanim, the priest, naturally, and the owner, who all share its parts. That's a great concept, that even through his eating of a sacrificial service, sacrificial flesh, a man participates in the service of his Creator, is limited to the nation, whose multitude of Torah commandments trains it to comprehend such a challenge and an opportunity over here. So that's very interesting. Yeah, we shared over 3 insights over here. Masechet Zevachim, as we're pointing out, and Bez Hashem, we're going to be in the Grand Siyum, hopefully in the coming days. So don't forget to subscribe, enjoy. Have a fantastic day, everyone. Thanks.